my fun fact is my younger sister, her 5th grade field trip was to Felix Hernandez's perfect game, and she didn't even realize what had happened. So that was pretty awesome. But yeah, I mean, it's what sparked my love for baseball.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Aces Loaded podcast. I'm Zack Bayrouty. Our player guest today is Corbin Carroll. How you doing, man?
Doing well. How about you?
Doing well. You're getting your feet wet here in AAA. You're what now? 15 games into your tenure. So, how are you feeling now that you've come up to AAA this season?
You know, it's a different experience, I'd say, than AA, in a lot of different ways. But I'd say the biggest thing that's made it real easy on me is the staff that we've had, and also the players. Like, playing with a lot of they've made me feel at home.
You know, I did this with Straley. I did this interview with Dan Straley a couple months ago, and he and I go way back. And he was telling me in an honest moment that when he got to AAA, he was more nervous to make his AAA debut than he was to make his big league debut, because he said when he got to AAA, he felt like he really had to prove like he belonged. And once he aced AAA, he felt like he did belong, and he could go right into his big league tenure. But can you vibe with that, or do you kind of get what he's saying, and have you felt any of that?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually ended up listening to that one as well. To that
listener of the Aces, he listens to the Aces Loaded podcast, by the way.
But yeah, I mean, you understand it. I mean, I think any time that there's a change like that and just some uncertainty, you've had a routine that you've stuck with throughout, a good number of games, being at a level. For me in AA, I think it was about 60 or 70 games that I'd had a consistent routine and kind of knew what I was getting into. And so I'd say it was more just that of like those first few days, understanding how that routine was going to change, and adapt to Reno and these visiting ballparks. And it's a great setup there. It's nice to have the 2 cages to be able to get into. I can do everything I want to.
You were the 16th overall pick in 2019. We'll get into that in a moment, but I want to find out like what sparked your love for baseball at an early age. You grew up in Seattle. Did you grow up a Mariners fan?
I did. Not too good of baseball being played there while I was growing up, but did get to see some really exciting players. Got to see Ichiro and Robinson Cano, Felix Hernandez. My fun fact is my younger sister, her 5th grade field trip was to Felix Hernandez's perfect game, and she didn't even realize what had happened. So that was pretty awesome. But yeah, I mean, it's what sparked my love for baseball. I mean, it was really just getting into it like any other kid. Parents throwing me in t-ball, and just ever since then. I did play other sports growing up, but it was always baseball. But that was my love.
First of all, I remember that King Felix game, the perfect game. And secondly, if you're wondering, well, of course there were good Mariners teams in the early 2000s. They had that epic 0-1 team. You're born in 2000, so for a lot of people listening to this, they're going to feel like really old. And people actually hate me when I tell them that you were born in 2000, because instantly they feel like they're ancient, me included. But when did you realize you were really good at baseball? I mean, you're one of the best players in the world. So when did you realize that this was something that you were really, really good at?
I think that's a hard question, because I've got a lot of self-confidence, but I never really try and view myself in that way. I just try and view myself as an ongoing process, and that's how I hope to continue to view myself throughout my career, is just constantly learning and adapting and evolving. And so I knew I was one of the better players in the area growing up, but maybe didn't really have so much of that national kind of
recognition.
Yeah, just to compare myself to. I'd always played in-state growing up, and then I'd say probably about my junior year of high school, my sophomore year of high school, started to do a little bit more travel stuff, kind of summer circuit stuff, and I think at that point I had a better understanding of how I stacked up against some of these other players, and maybe that pro ball could be an opportunity for me.
What tool did you see developed first of the tools that you have? You have many, but which one really jumped off the charts to people and they started telling you about it?
I think in my own eyes, I was always, the fast kid, and I always hit. I think those were the two things that have kind of stuck with me from early on.
Speaking of fast, I said this on air. You're the fastest player that I've covered outside of Billy Hamilton. Billy Hamilton, in 2012, I saw him in Bakersfield. He stole 100 bags that year, and it was silly. But you have that ridiculous speed. I mean, did you run track, or like how did you? Or was it just a natural gift, this speed, or did you have to work to develop it?
So it's funny. I always, growing up, viewed myself as more of like a long distance runner and not a very good sprinter. And so like I did cross country and that stuff. Never did track or any like short events, but so like mile, 5K. That was kind of more my thing. And then I'd say freshman year of high school, kind of realized that if baseball was the path I wanted to go on, some more shorter, more explosive stuff would probably be more well received for baseball. And so at that point, I kind of phased out of the long distance running, and workout wise was a lot more focused on being explosive and yeah.
You're drafted out of high school in the Seattle area in 2019. I said 16th overall, but what was that process like for you, and what was that day like for you?
That was a super special day for me. I got to share that day with family, friends, coaches, and teammates, and so just being able to kind of have that moment with them was something I'll never forget, and it truly meant a lot to me, just to have that support system there, and just kind of be able to look around that room all at one time and see them all there. It meant a lot. And so I actually had school that day in the morning. Got off of school at about 3 p.m. and then headed to the house. Everyone came over. We catered some Mexican food, and it was a good time.
That's cool, man. High school. I mean, can't imagine going to high school and then all of a sudden you're drafted, 16th overall. In 2019, after you got drafted, you got to get your feet wet a little bit with Hillsborough. You hit 326 in a short amount of time. But what did that do for you as far as, feeling like you belong? I know you're confident, but did you have any I don't want to say reservations going into pro ball, but any doubts that were, squelched with you hitting 326 in that short time, your first foray at Hillsborough?
I'd say the biggest thing I took away from that experience was the players that I played with. Just being around some college-age guys and kind of them showing me how to take care of business. I think that was really instrumental in helping me develop myself as a professional baseball player, and capping that run off with Northwest League Championship. I think that was all you could ask for in your first year, and we ended up actually taking that championship game at the stadium where we played the state championship my freshman year of high school. So it was a full circle moment.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. But you go right from that into the pandemic. So how did you handle the pandemic? What did you do to keep yourself fresh and to work on your game for when you came back?
So we
by the way, Wilmer Defoe is the cameraman right now, so that's what we're looking at. What's up, Def?
So COVID. Okay, so went back to Seattle. Didn't have access to a gym for a little while there, and so my dad had ended up building like a little weight room set up in our shoe room, so that was pretty sweet. Cool. Worked out there for the first month or two, and then was able to access a gym after that. And, just did what I could to stay ready, and I don't think anyone necessarily knew what that timeline would look like for getting back down to Arizona and starting back up, but I just took it a day at a time, and whether it was with running stuff, weightlifting stuff, hitting with my dad pretty much every day. Just found a way to try and get something out of that, and I actually think that some of the changes that I made there, both to my body and to my swing, ended up benefited me more than maybe just ingraining some patterns that weren't as favorable.
We're talking with Corbin Carroll here on the Aces Loaded podcast. I've talked with a bunch of guys about this, and from all accounts, you're very mentally advanced when it comes to being able to digest a scouting report and then subsequently to control an at-bat. What's your mental process like before an at-bat?
For sure. So I try to be prepared. That's the big thing is, not necessarily like the more information that I can get, the better, but the more information that I have to have my own filter around it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a point where it's just too much and not helpful, but kind of just with the D-backs help and even with coaches here like Nick Evans especially, just being able to dive into these reports that we're being given and realize what's helpful to me and what's not. That's kind of how I just try and paint a mental picture of this pitcher and make some guesses from there and just take that, and then when it's time to go in the game and compete, it's time to go in the game and compete.
What's the biggest difference you've noticed with AAA pitching coming from the lower levels?
They're not as willing to give as good of a pitch to hit. 2-0. A lot of guys are still trying to just make their pitch as opposed to just get something over. I think to some extent, I feel like AAA pitchers so far have been more willing to give away the walk than get hurt by an extra base hit by leaving something in the middle of the plate. And so that's kind of been my understanding so far is just, hey, stick to you. Don't get away from the player you are with your plate discipline and searching for your pitch to hit. But it's definitely been a little different, I'd say, than the other levels before.
On July 10th, you made your Aces debut, and I'll never forget calling this game. It was one of my favorite games I think I've ever called. You hit a home run in your second AAA at bat. You throw Forrest Wall out at the plate in extra innings trying to score. We were playing Tacoma, and Forrest Wall is one of the fastest dudes in AAA, and you throw him out at the plate. It was a hell of a AAA debut for you. Do you remember what it felt like that day for you, and will that always be a memory for you?
Yeah, that was a great first game to be a part of. I had a little streak going there for a little bit where I think the first 9 games I played and we won. So I was trying not to say anything, but I had that in my mind. I was like, all right, come on, maybe we'll just win them all. But no, that was a special, definitely a special memory, and just fun game to be a part of.
It was an interesting week for you because you get called up to AAA, but you're coming from Amarillo, you get to Reno. The team's going to go back to Sugar Land, so they're flying back to Texas to play Sugar Land, but then you're going to fly to LA to play in the Futures game, and then you got to go back and get your car, from what I heard, in Amarillo. So it was a wild week for you. Outside of the Futures game, which I'll hit on in a sec, what was that week like for you, and was it a bit of a whirlwind, and what will you remember about that time?
For sure. So there was actually another little wrinkle in there too. I was in Arizona before I came to Reno for almost 2 weeks, and then played 2 rehab games, and then got the call from our AA manager saying that I wasn't going to be coming back, and that I was going to be headed to Reno. And so and that was the last day that I was in Arizona. I had my flight information for headed back to Amarillo already and all that, and so it just kind of threw me for a loop there. So yeah, showed up to Reno with 1 bat and no white cleats. Just had to wear the road grays for that first home game, but just kind of funny stuff to look back on. I think all went well, and just special.
What was that drive like from Amarillo to Reno?
So I went from Amarillo to Phoenix and then stopped there for the rest of the All-Star break, but I'd done the reverse drive to get out there, and so it wasn't too bad. My dad came with me, and so that made it a lot easier.
It was cool to spend time with him kind of in this moment where you're having this transformation in your career.
Yeah, just I'm really close with my family, and they're super supportive of me, and you know, just can't thank them enough for that. But yeah, just to have that, you know, little 10-hour drive with Dad was kind of a fun, just little quiet time to have, you know, away from everything, and yeah.
Great family, by the way. Got him up in the booth last week and got to meet them all, and they're phenomenal. What was the Futures game like for you? You doubled in that game. What was the experience like?
Super fortunate for that opportunity, and you know, I think anytime you get to represent the Diamondbacks like that, it's you know, truly an honor. And so being able to do that, and then as well as do it with a teammate, Jordan Lawler, or an org mate, I guess. We hadn't been teammates up until that point, but to share that game with him, and I just think it was super fun, just, you know, being there and kind of seeing him out there too. It's like, you know, maybe a little glimpse of the future up the middle or something.
Yeah, kind of in that same vein, and these are the last couple. What's it like? How do you handle the prospect status? Like, this is big-time prospect status. Mentally, how do you handle that and not let it weigh you down? And you've done a great job of that, obviously, ever since you got drafted.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me is that it's not a part of my identity, of my self-identity, and it's not how I value myself. And there's so much more important things to me, like you know, just doing right by other people, maintaining you know, relationships with friends and family, and I've just got a lot of stuff that you know, I hope that others value a lot more about me than just, you know, what kind of a prospect I am. And so I think that's a testament to my friends and family for maintaining that, right, and maintaining those bonds just for what they are, and kind of that pureness of it. I think that's been the big thing.
That's phenomenal, man. Lastly, to wrap it up, you know, you're part of this young outfield for the Diamondbacks, and I've seen pretty much all these guys now. I mean, you, Alec, Fletch. Don't forget about Jake. You know, I'm probably missing someone in there too. But I mean, you're part of this outfield that's considered maybe a generational outfield in a couple of years. What's it like amongst you guys that's the core of this young group coming up with the D-backs?
So I think the first real glimpse I got of that was Alt-Site in 2020. You know, having all those guys pretty much out there. You know, Varsh was out there, Alec, Fletch, just a lot of guys, and then, you know, played, you know, with Instructs and stuff like that with Jake as well. And it's just so fun because those guys are so competitive and such great players that you know, it makes me feel like, you know, just I've got to come every day with that fire too, because I know they will. And so if it's as simple as, you know, just outfield drills, you know, maybe a round of BP, whatever it is, I mean, those guys always want to compete, and I think that's what truly separates them and makes them such great players.
Hey man, it's been a lot of fun to watch you. You're a phenomenal human being, and I wish you all the best success in the future. We're lucky to have you here in Reno. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
It's Corbin Carroll. We'll come back and have a beer with Doug Drabek next on the Aces Loaded podcast.
Bird struck out 23 and 20 in the third.
Sliding neat stop by Duzan. Nearly in front. From Herrera on one bounce.
Ace Ball is here. For tickets, visit RenoAces.com all summer long.
We are back on the Aces Loaded podcast. It is our long-lost segment, A Beer with Doug Drabek. It's been a minute since we've gotten to have a beer with Doug and hear a story or two. So I got one hand right now. I'm going to use my knee and crack the Coors Light, which is what we're drinking today. Cheers, Dougie.
Yes.
Thirsty Thursday, presented by Coors Light. $2 Coors Light on Thursdays, $4 Ace Ball Ales. Normally we do this with an Ace Ball Ale, but we're on the road, so it's Coors Light today. So my two things are today. You played in an era in the 80s and 90s when you had all kinds of all-purpose stadiums. Like it's not the landscape that we know now with these ballparks, but your home ballpark was Three Rivers for a time, and of course the Astrodome. But what was it like playing in those multi-purpose stadiums? And can you take us kind of inside, like the locker rooms there and what the feel was in the dugouts? Because it's vastly different than what we know now.
Right. I mean, that's what had been around, so you just kind of were used to it. Either, as a youngster watching on TV, or if you live close to a stadium that was like that, going to it and seeing, and now playing in it, it was just like, it is what it is. This is what they do. I think the locker rooms were probably very basic back then. You had some that were bigger than others, but now compared to what they have now, it looks, cave age. So, it wasn't bad. The Astrodome, you knew the temperature was going to be nice and you were going to get the game in. But like I said, it was, it was something you were used to and you just did it.
In a lot of those ballparks, there were carpet, AstroTurf carpet. How did that change the dynamic of what you did, especially if you were a ground ball pitcher, and those balls were rockets, I'm sure, off the carpet?
Right, yeah. The turf was the old AstroTurf, and if it was newer stuff, it wasn't too bad, but there were a few stadiums that the turf was older, and it was quick and bouncy. St. Louis always comes to mind for me because theirs was very bouncy, and they kind of built their team on some guys who could run, just beat the ball in the ground and go. So it was a little different. I've always liked grass only because I want my infielders and outfielders to want to dive for balls. And, diving on that stuff, it could be rough on some guys. Even with the new turf now is a lot better. It feels like grass. So, it was, it was kind of rough.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I can't imagine having to dive on that as well, and I can't imagine being a pitcher having moments of frustration where the ball just becomes a rocket on you. The other part to what I remember about baseball in that era was the fashion of the time. And for me, you always have stood out in the forefront of my mind, even before I knew you, as a guy that embodied what 80s and 90s, early 90s baseball players looked like. You got the mustache, you got the hair out a little bit. I've got some great baseball cards. I'm sure I have 25 cards of yours, but what was the deal back then? Did guys just, was the mustache just the fad, and then it became the hair? And I hope whoever's editing this is going to put the picture up of you maybe later in your time with the Astros. You had some great lettuce, man. Yeah. But what was up with that? And was that something that you guys tried to outdo each other on?
I think it was just kind of part of the times, where the 60s and 70s, and then it kind of went down, and then, like you said, the long hair started coming back, the mustaches, the beards, unless you're on a couple of teams that wouldn't allow facial hair. But I think it was just part of the time. And I had one in college, but then had to shave it, and then I started growing it back. And the only time I shaved it was when I was with the Yankees until I made it to the big leagues. So it's always been on my face for decades. But you could see the long hair, and now it's kind of gotten back to that. Now you see a lot of guys with long hair and the big beards. I don't think we really had big beards. Mm-hmm. Now you see a lot of that.
I don't think they look as what is old is new again. These guys are growing it out, but I still don't think they looked as menacing as you guys did. Are you aware how menacing that made you guys look?
I didn't even think about it, to be honest with you.
I think I remember watching you face the Red Sox, and I was like, man, Drabek looks like he'd not be a good dude to face. He was just, you looked mean with the mustache and with the lettuce, Dougie. But thanks for taking a trip back in time and having a beer. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's a beer with Doug Drabek. Doug Drabek. Wow, I can't even say your name. And I've only had 3 sips. It's a beer with Doug Drabek, presented by Coors Light and My Ride to Work. And this has been the Aces Loaded podcast. We'll see you next time.